Thank you very much for joining us on this special edition of PM Express. And I'm in front of greatness. That word has always been abused, legal luminary. But this one is truly indeed one. And last week we celebrated him, the entire country did actually, although it was at the on the back of the UPSA deciding to honor him, the honorific lecture, which I monitored and watched with close attention. At the time, I had asked my team to reach out and see if we can get an interview post that lecture. He was honored, lifetime achievement, and indeed he's done so much for not only the judiciary, but for this country. And I'm delighted to say that he is my guest tonight on PM Express, and that is Mr. Tsatsu Tsikata. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
For agreeing
nice
to
see you again.
Yes. And I must indicate that this is the second time I'm interviewing him in his home. The last time it was closer to the hall, but this time in the beautiful garden here. And when I watched you last week, you still look strong and healthy. And even for us young men, sometimes standing for that long is a challenge. but you managed it so nicely. What was the most abiding feeling when you acknowledged with some of your friends there, the Chief Justice, the Vice President, when you walked up, your wife gave a fantastic rendition of the song. I was just wondering how you must have been feeling.
It was quite exciting, and truly there were some people I did not know were meant to be there, like the Vice President, the Chief Justice. I thought it would be a little academic gathering, and it was humbling to have such a great cloud of witnesses, as I said in my speech, and humbling also in an important way, because there were a lot of students, as you saw, and it took my own mind back to student days, when I too was encouraged by the occasions when people came to speak to us and so on. And the enthusiasm of the students ended up being a bit crushing for me, because afterwards, picture taking and so on, that was actually a longer thing than standing to make my remarks. But it was a wonderful occasion.
Yeah, and when you were preparing, what was the message that you wanted us all to leave that lecture with?
Amazing grace. Amazing grace.
Amazing grace.
Amazing grace.
Why amazing grace?
Amazing grace because I mean, standing there, being honored for a lifetime, I mean, it's not been an easy lifetime, even from my asthmatic sort of infancy. And, through the whole political situation of my trial and imprisonment, and I could have been dead, so there wouldn't have been even a posthumous award wouldn't have been so exciting. It would have been a bit mournful. Yeah. So it was exciting for me that I could be alive on that occasion, and Amazing Grace truly was my abiding emotion.
I see, and I see that your Christian faith anchors you so strongly. And you may not be seeing it, but there's I don't know whether there's a sign in the garden that says you are closest to God in this garden.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I guess it's all sort of part of what you represent.
Absolutely.
And on that occasion, that's exactly what you wanted to contribute and communicate. Why is this so essential to you? And I see not only you, but to the family, to your wife also.
Well, I mean, truly, if I'm being honored, I mean, whatever talents I have are not endowed by myself. I didn't put those talents in myself.
Okay.
And my ability to stand in court or to, give a lecture to my students, as I've done over the decades, none of that has been endowed by myself. So I have had a profound sense of gratitude, to my creator, my maker. And because of my particular experiences, that has been even deeper because, as I've often said, I mean, God meant it for good even when I was in prison. Okay. Because that time could have been a low point. I could have been depressed by the circumstances. I was in a cell with 10 other people. Here was I, lawyer, law lecturer. There was I in a prison cell. But it really, I recall my first night in prison. And that morning before I left home, Esther and I had actually been reading from Genesis, opening chapters, Garden of Eden, idyllic sort of setting. And I go to prison that evening, I wasn't expecting to be, but it struck me that outside the birds were still singing. And from even that window, I could see there were mountains and there was a setting which was also a setting of God. So, that itself is extremely comforting. And I must say, from my scripture union days at Mfansfim, when Miss Florence Yeboah came and powerfully ministered to us and so on, the presence of God in my life has been evident, and I've never shied away from talking about that.
There's something that the Chief Justice said about you, and since you're talking about amazing grace, one of the things is a skill that you wielded, and you still wield. The Chief Justice described you as, quote, formidable skill, somebody with formidable skill and a rare gift. You agree?
Well, I have to defer to others to comment about my capabilities, but I do recognize that I am often inspired, even in my court, sort of appearances. I'm often inspired in the moment with words that I had not necessarily formulated elaborately. And I'll give you an example. When during the 2013 election petition, we had to make final submissions, and the court indicated that we would all have, 30 minutes for the final submissions. And I remember the night before, I decided I'd go to bed very early, wake up in the morning, and then write some notes, and then try to articulate in 30 minutes. 30 minutes, that gives you very limited time, and that's the most difficult sort of occasion, because you have to really compress your thoughts very, put it in very precise language. Anyway, long story short, I did wake up early. I slept early. I woke up early in the morning by 5:30, came down to my study, but I didn't put down a word. I was just in an atmosphere of worship. In those days, Donnie McClurkin's "Great is your mercy towards me, your loving kindness now I see," was very much on my heart. So I played it over and over again. I didn't put down a word of notes. By the time I got to court, however, what I needed to say had formed in my mind. And I gather I spoke for 29 minutes, 30 seconds.
Wow.
And I wasn't looking at my watch or anything like that. But, I think that...
So all that wasn't scripted?
It wasn't scripted. I did not... Those 30 minutes are some of my proudest 30 minutes of, submissions in court.
You were simply inspired?
Yeah, it was inspired. Of course, we had been preparing in the sense of knowing what the evidence was, what the elements of, law were and so on. But I did not script that. And it was very much an inspired...
Where does that come from, though? Because 30 minutes almost on the dot.
Yes.
And I remember watching you, and you kept to the time. But again, your articulation of the issues, is it just simply experience? Having done it for so long?
Well, not really. Not really. And I'll tell you, I started practicing at the high levels from when I was
very young.
Barely a year.
I mean, growing up, we all had the story about the fabled the young lawyer who started doing things.
So
he was a prodigy.
I think that it couldn't be experience necessarily, though of course experience also helps over the years. Experience enables you to determine certain things that can be more effective when articulated to judges and so on. That definitely experience has, but for me, inspiration is important, and I thank God for inspiration. And sometimes the inspiration comes, again, not sometimes, usually it's in very unexpected ways. I had a very famous case which is reported in the law reports also, and it was a case where the client, it happened to be National Investment Bank. They lost the case in the High Court, lost in the Court of Appeal, and then I was brought in for the Supreme Court. And when we initially looked at the matter, I mean, it was a case that really they should have been successful at from an early stage, but it looks like, it didn't go their way. I remember taking that case up with the knowledge that this was going to be a tall order because they had lost in the High Court, they lost in the Court of Appeal. But again, my mind became quite clear about the fact that those decisions in the lower courts had not taken account of very important legal points and also of important facts that had been before those courts. So we started highlighting one of the important legal points, but we also found it necessary, I found it very necessary to elaborate my submissions in terms of all the factual background, because I knew that judges are sometimes uncomfortable just deciding on a technical point, so to speak. And so there was an elaborate 166-page submission around all the facts and so on, but also highlighting the legal point. Now, the legal point I highlighted by reference to the rules of court and so on, but I had not been aware of a certain decision of the Supreme Court which was exactly along the lines that I was going to be arguing. I wasn't aware of it when I wrote the initial submissions. But one day in my study, just flipping through, occasionally I flipped through law reports and other texts and so on. Flipping through a law report in my study, I came upon a case exactly on the lines of what I had submitted without reference to the case, but just by reference to the rules of court. And so, of course, I began to prepare for the response that I would give when the other side wrote their submissions in reply to ours. And of course, in the end, that case was very important in helping the Supreme Court to decide in favor of National Investment Bank in a case that they had lost in the court below and also in the High Court. So there are those moments that I cherish when, something sort of dawns on me, something is brought to my attention, and sometimes it's brought to my attention by some of my young colleagues, lawyers, juniors who work with me, who do the research. During that election petition, a lot of research was done by juniors, and I could get up and make it seem as if I knew everything, but they had actually done the work. And I was blessed with the enthusiastic industry of some of those juniors.
I want to take you back to something that you talked about quite extensively in your lecture, and you've mentioned it, that trial that you had to endure. And you tell the story, and I'll come to one of the things you said that fascinated me, that you don't hold any grudges, so come to that. But to the trial itself, how do you still reflect on it today when you think back to what happened to you in the early 2000s?
It's very difficult to understand all the circumstances. except that there was a clear and very definitive intention on the part of the president at the time and all the powers that be.
And
that
just for the record, those who just don't have the context, this was when Tsatsu Tsikata was being tried for causing financial loss to the state. And I think it was just shy of, the amount involved was just shy of 300,000 CDs, if I'm not mistaken.
It was dollars.
Dollars, yes. You know, and that trial went on and on and on. And by the way, that causing financial loss to the state law itself was non-existent for a while, until almost around the time that they started prosecuting you. If you recall, if you can give us a background to that law, because that law was...
Yes, you know, it's interesting. That law, it was passed before my trial, but it was actually passed before some of the facts that I was being charged with occurred.
Okay.
And that was the reason why, at a certain stage, when the case was brought before a high court, we raised an objection that you can't use a law retroactively to try somebody. So I was accused of having signed a guarantee which led to financial loss to GMPC. Now, the facts relating to the signing of the guarantee, those facts occurred in February, whatever year it was, I forget the actual year, but it was February. Then, you know, the facts occurred in February. The law was passed in July of that year. So clearly the law did not exist at the time that I took whatever decisions that I took, and those, yet I was being charged under that law. So the judge, Justice Ansah, may he rest in peace, he was a Court of Appeal judge then, he was brought down to the High Court, fast track court, and he immediately saw the point when we raised the objection. My counsel, Professor Ivy Odankwa, raised the objection that, I mean, I can't be charged retroactively. The Constitution is very clear on the matter. And I remember him asking the Director of Public Prosecutions, you know, I mean, can you really charge him retroactively? The director said, well, the charge says on or about whatever date in February 1990, whatever. And then the judge asked him, so on or about February can mean July. And of course, he didn't really have an answer to that. So that case was thrown out at that stage. Then, after the Supreme Court had reversed its earlier decision in my favor, which said that the fast track court was not constitutional, then I was put before a fast track court again. And this time, the charge was reformulated so that even though what I did, which was really the guarantee, took place before the coming into force of the law, the payment that was done under the guarantee in GMPC took place after the law came into effect. Now, unfortunately for them also, the payment was not done on my instructions. The Director of Finance for GMPC himself came to give evidence and made it clear that he made the payment and he didn't seek my authorization. So basically, it was clear that, I mean, they couldn't get out of that retroactive legislation issue, but there was a determination at all costs. Yeah, and you know, that determination became crystal clear on that morning of June 18th. Because, I mean,
you remember the day.
There was really no indication that any judgment was going to happen that day. I mean, the court had not sat for more than a year. The matter about whether the International Finance Corporation could testify as a defense witness, that matter had gone to the Court of Appeal. The judge said she would wait for the Court of Appeal decision. After the Court of Appeal decision, she said she'd wait for the Supreme Court decision. Now, June 18th, the Supreme Court decision was going to be June 25th. That had been set by the Supreme Court, and I pointed that out to the judge. But it was of no effect because that day had been set by the powers that be as the day I should be sent to prison. the police, the prison officers, everybody else was there in readiness. I was the only stranger in Jerusalem on that occasion. And my lawyer had traveled, I made it clear, and so on. So I don't think you can run away from the fact that this was a determined, go to jail at all costs. A decision that had been made at the highest levels, and it had to be that day. And in the end, thank God for it. God meant it for good.
And I must indicate, this whole episode is now put in great context. And I was a court correspondent that covered your case cover to cover from beginning to the end, and my formative years. And that first time I encountered that legal concept of laws not respected. In fact, it's exactly during your trial. And one of the things that happened at the time was there was a movement that had been formed called the Free Tsatsu movement. And there were, now we have renowned lawyers who led it, Tony Later and others who were distributing T-shirts to campaign against what was happening to you. A lot of the time when this was happening, were you aware of the mobilization and the support you had to try and get the system to back off from what was happening to you that many thought was an injustice?
I was, and my wife was very much the mobilizer of that movement. And she would brief me about the meetings that they were having and so on. And of course, Tony Lither and people sometimes visited me in prison. And I used to listen sometimes on radio to some of the activities, because there was coverage on radio, probably on Joy and so on.
Yes.
And I remember I was fascinated because some of the articulation about the case was so in-depth by people who I didn't realize were following it. I'll tell you, Ablakwa Okujetu was one person I remember hearing when I was in a prison cell. And he articulated the circumstances of my case in a way which just amazed me, because I didn't know that somebody like him had been following it. But that's just one example. Even internationally, I got messages, of support from people. Sometimes they would send emails to Esther and to my siblings and so on. And that's why I'm saying that all through that, I had no cause to be downhearted or to be brought low. It was an amazing mobilization.
It was.
Absolutely right.
It was. And each time we went to court, the place was full of people in black with your face in the front of the T-shirt. And there was a song that was composed.
That you go there.
Exactly. There's a song that was composed. And that's exactly what, because I remember it was such a powerful moment when you went to court. And even in that song, there was God in it.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And I didn't compose that song, by the way.
Who did?
The people, there's some gentlemen in Osu who composed that song. I think one of these days I'll bring them to your studio.
Yes, we should. And it was a powerful song, because each time one day somebody raises the voice and everybody just joins the chorus.
And there were some ladies from Nima who were part of the chorus of that song. Yeah. And to this day, I feel very grateful to them, because these were ordinary people who didn't necessarily have any connection with me before. But in their hearts, they saw something had gone wrong, and they rallied behind my wife in sending that message across. And I remember sometimes when I came to court from prison, at the time when I was appearing before the Supreme Court, right up there, the Supreme Court used to be on that third floor up there. And it was so incredible hearing these women singing, Tsatsu God, my voice isn't so good, but they had great voices.
Yes, yes.
And it was so encouraging, so inspiring.
It was, and I want to take you back to a moment in court that I mentioned to you before we started the interview that for me never left to me. I think for me was a singular, most abiding memory of the trial as I covered it. You came to court from prison. That day you chose you're not going to rely on the Constitution, not the criminal code, no law as passed by Parliament, but you came with the Bible, the Holy Bible. I believe it was a black one, and you were called and you picked it. And you were defending yourself that day. Your lawyer was not in
my
court.
lawyer had traveled. He still was out of the country. Yes.
But I remember you were defending, and I thought, did he just decide to defend himself? Now you're telling me what happened. But you decided that day that you would use the Bible, and you quoted from the Bible in your defense. Walk me through the thought process that led to that moment. It was such a fascinating moment.
You know, the Bible is an immense resource, an immense human resource, because it tells, you know, amazing stories of human experience, human, you know, situations that, and I've often found it the most dependable recourse when I'm trying to put together certain thoughts. In that particular occasion, on that occasion, I must tell you, I think I was dealing with a situation where I was asking for bail after, you know, the High Court judge before whom I appeared had refused me bail. I was asking for bail. And I was trying to bring to the judge's attention the fact that, you know, some of the undercurrents of my case might seem like there were things done in secret. But I think the passage I quoted was a passage to the effect that whatever is done in secret will eventually come out on the rooftops. Because I sense that the most important point to make to that judge was not any legal point, because the legal points were clear and obvious, but just to make it known that he himself has to answer for whatever determination, whatever decision he makes, and just draw his attention to that reality, that whatever he might think will be a thing done in secret, you know, on the basis of the instructions that he's received or whatever, ultimately it will be out on the rooftops. And when you think back on how my case became something that was known about, spoken about, written about over the years, I think you can see that that was a relevant text from the Bible.
Because that is how it panned out.
Yes.
We got to know a lot of the things that happened. There was this, if I recall correctly, there must have been a call that must have been placed to, I believe, Henrietta Abban, who was in terms of your case. I mean, something around that. I mean, it's hazy now, but because I covered it, I remember it was a controversial point. Just before the judgment was delivered. If you can recall, you could shed some light on that.
You know, that morning, she had, through her clerks, she had sent a message that we were to be in court at 8 a.m., which was not a usual time. And, I mean, I didn't really understand why, but sometimes judges have an early hearing so that they can attend to other matters. Yeah. So I picked up, because my lawyer was not in town then, and I did not expect that it would be a judgment or that there would really be any proceeding. In fact, my lawyer had made an application. I remember that detail too. He had made an application that something that had happened in the Supreme Court the week before, you know, in the Supreme Court the week before, the Attorney General had virtually admitted that the project in respect of which the guarantee signature, you know, put me in trouble, was a viable project. That the Attorney General actually admitted that in the Supreme Court. And so he was arguing that it's not necessary to bring the IFC as a witness to testify to that because they admit it, there's no need. So my lawyer was asking the High Court to allow us to bring the evidence of what the Attorney General had said in the Supreme Court to the record of the High Court. That was the application that he made. And unfortunately, he had to travel urgently out of the country. So at best, the only thing that was before the court was our application for this issue to be brought to the record of the High Court. There was nothing else by way of a judgment being ready, nothing, because we hadn't finished our defense. So I go to court that morning, and I can't say that I know about the calls that were made and so on. But what I later realized, when I went at 8, I didn't pay attention to the surroundings. What I later realized was that the prison officers were around, the police were all around, so they clearly knew what was going to happen. They knew that I was going to go to jail. I didn't know, but they all knew, and they were around. And so we go into the proceedings, and back and forth with the judge. I explain my lawyer can't be here. She says, you're a lawyer yourself. And I say, well, I haven't been defending myself. I don't have the brief and so on. She still carries on. The Attorney General says we can go on and so on and so
Without
forth.
your lawyer?
Without my lawyer. And so it was clear that there was a decision already planned. And it was also clear because even though she had not sat for 1.5 years, she had a judgment ready. And she said the day of judgment is here. And there had been no notice of a judgment. I mean, look, the most elementary thing in legal practice is that, you must know in advance what you're going to be facing when you're going into a court situation. It didn't happen that way. And she decided the day of judgment had arrived, and she was going to proceed. Nothing that I tried to say would stop her. And what was also interesting, at the end of her judgment, which she read and convicted me, I then got up and said, can I have bail pending the sentence? Because you can convict a person and then, grant them bail and set a date for the sentence, And of course, she wouldn't have any of that either. So I ended up in jail, and it was the most unexpected experience.
So that day when you were coming to court, you came from home?
Yes, I came from home. That's what I'm saying. We had been reading the passage, Genesis, a quiet time, and I told Esther, I'm going to take a date because I assumed that the judge would be giving a date. So I said, I'm going to take a date. So I went and picked up Martin Newman from his office. I was driving, and I drove him. We went to court, and then everything.
You left your bed
yes.
and your wife and the scriptures in the morning.
Yes.
By evening,
I was in jail.
You were in jail.
Yes.
How did that whole episode feel? I'm talking about that very day.
As I said, that very day, it was, of course, calming that I have faith and I know that God's hand is at work in my life. But I mean, I couldn't understand what was going on, in the sense that, this was nothing that I had ever,
imagined possible.
Imagined or conceptualized, not just for myself, but in terms of legal process for anybody. I could not comprehend it. So,
how much of a shock was it to your system that day?
Well, it was a shock, but not so much of a shock that I couldn't stay and write my appeal in the court.
You did?
Because I managed to go into the office of the registrar of the High Court, and I wrote out my appeal on that day. And fortunately, they managed to hold off the prison officers and the police officers from trying to rush me away. And it was quite an incredible occasion. And so I wrote my appeal, my ground. So I was composed enough to write the grounds of appeal and so on. But it was quite an incredible experience. But as I said, by evening, listening to the birds singing even around the prison cell and seeing the mountains around the Nsawam prison, I felt that at that time, that was where God wanted me to be.
Even then, in all things, you were still giving thanks?
Yes, I was. And I still continue to give thanks for that experience, because that experience itself, the experience of being in prison those 5 months, was an experience that was full of important lessons. Lessons including just the experiences of other people, other less fortunate people. I was fortunate. I had a lawyer, in fact, more than one. I had, junior counsel as well. There are people who had been in prison for years without trial. They had nobody to help them. And some of those people, approached to see what help I could give and so on. But I saw experiences of others which made mine pale into insignificance. And in that time also, knowing the sort of mobilization that my wife and Kwesi Pratt and Tri and Tony Litha and people, one of the people, I mentioned Ablakwa, one of the other people was Omani Buama of blessed memory. And again, he's not somebody that I knew before that time, or that my wife knew. But these were principled people who, were just outraged by what, and you can now understand why last August, when we were going to have the 50th commemoration of my enrollment as a lawyer, and the news came of the helicopter crash.
We had to
cancel the event. Because somebody like Omani, young doctor, he didn't need to get himself embroiled in a legal matter and so on. But his sense of justice, his sense of outrage about what was happening to me made him rally round. And again, those are things that I don't take for granted. All these people who, just out of the generosity of their hearts, took up my cause. And many thousands of them, probably millions, whom I will never get to meet or know. And that's what I'm saying. That is the almighty, God's own hand at work in putting across my story around the country. There were people who had these free Tsatsu stickers in different parts of the country. Somebody told me he saw some in the streets of Lagos and so on. So I can't take any of that for granted.
What was prison like? That cell, and each time when great men go to prison, the cell becomes a place of almost reverence for them. They never forget. And the number, the famous story of Nelson Mandela, whose famous prison is still there for people. What was your cell like? The cell that I was in those 5 months was actually like the holding cell, just near the sort of entrance. So it wasn't right inside the prison cell. It was like the holding cell. And there were 11 of us, I remember. In one cell?
In one cell, yeah. And so, most people were sleeping on the floor and so on.
You slept on the floor?
But I had a bed.
Okay.
And I suppose that was a favor done to me, I had a bed. And I think there were probably 2 or 3 beds at different corners of the room. I had a bed in one corner. I think the cell leader also had a bed and so on. And, really, I didn't feel out of place, let me put it quite frankly. There was a young 16-year-old. A 16-year-old shouldn't be in an adult prison. But there was a young 16-year-old who had been brought in with his older brother. I think there was some contempt of court against them arising out of some civil proceedings, some quarrel with some other people. And he was in prison, 16-year-old. And like I said, that experience of seeing how, the law doesn't work for a lot of people. And I was relatively, privileged, having the ability to have lawyers represent me and so on and so forth. For many of those people, they didn't have the opportunity of even counsel to represent them. So there was a lot that was very sobering about that whole situation. And sobering in the sense too that it enabled me to see, what a privileged life I had, by God's grace. What a privileged life. The fact that my wife could be bringing food every day to me in hospital, in the prison, and again, an aspect of this which I can say, even without having asked my wife's permission, she had been told that, and she'd been told from very dependable quarters, that she should not allow me to eat in the prison.
Okay.
Because there could be some plans around my eating the food regularly from prison.
As in poisoning you?
That is correct. And this was not just told as a little story or a petty gossip. It was told by somebody who knew what he was talking about. And I'm very grateful to that person. I would not mention his name for reasons which in this country we should understand. I will never want to mention his name.
So they not only persecute you, now they put you in jail and they wanted to kill you whilst there.
That's what we were authoritatively told. And so my wife daily was determined, whatever her responsibility, she had her own, company to run. Every day she brought me food. And that again was how come on the Sunday when I had that attack overnight, she was bringing me food only to learn that...
You had an attack, what happened?
No, on the 15th of November, when I had the asthmatic attack in the cell, through the night, and really there was nothing that could be done. By morning, she had come to bring me food. Then she was told that I was in the hospital. And she comes to the hospital and realizes that I was in a really bad state. And from the discussion she had with the prison director, God bless him, he's again passed, may he rest in peace, she was allowed to find an ambulance. The hospital didn't have an ambulance, the prison didn't have an ambulance. But she was able to get an ambulance arranged from Akufo-Addo, which then came to pick me up from the hospital at Nsawam and first to 37 Hospital. Intensive care, they weren't sure they could handle the situation. By evening, I was moved to the cardiothoracic center at Kolibu, where they had more facilities to be able to take care of that situation. And clearly I was in a very bad situation from, talking to the doctor, Dr. Sribo, afterwards. It was a very, very bad situation I was in.
Was that your lowest point behind bars?
In terms of, yes. I mean, without a doubt, it was my lowest point. But when you think about it, it was that lowest point that enabled me to come out of prison and be in a hospital situation where I could be attended to over a period and where I could be, successfully treated. And it was a life and death struggle.
I'm going to take a break. It's a very powerful, fascinating story. Reliving my own period, covering the trial, but also getting an insight into what happened to Mr. Tsikata behind bars. I'm going to take a break. When I return, there's something he said when he delivered that lecture about how he feels towards those who tried him and put him behind bars. He said something very fascinating. Again, he draws it from the scripture. And I'll ask him about that because it's almost not human to go through what he just described and still say the things he said about them the last week when he delivered his lecture. We'll ask him about that, and then we'll talk about other things that he had articulated during his speech. Obviously, you have to talk about the judiciary. He talked about that and how the judiciary can be used as a force for good and not a force for political persecution. Stay with me. We'll be right back.
Can he tee up someone in red? And it goes to
What 5 champions league? You want to know?
I be the real goat, Chairman.
Who is the goat? Ghana Jollof or Nigerian Jollof?
Ghana Jollof has no co-equal. The smell alone. Oh my God.
No, that shift. You two they lie, eh? Now the same stew when they use cook the rice and then they go put them for top.
Hey. You are lying. Ghana Jollof.
Are you here? Forget everybody. Yeah.
My guy.
Put your papa in the jar. Put some respect on the goat.
On the goat. The only goat I know lives in Tama.
Every year we dey give to you back.
We are talking about BET. I want some Yaji face.
Except be the goat, huh?
My guy, him be the goat.
Though our choice of goats may differ in football, music, and jollof, Alumobitus always brings us together. Alumo, experience greatness in every moment.
Drink responsibly. Not for sale to persons under 18, nor recommended to pregnant women. This advert is FDA approved.
Another week is here on the greatest of all time show. My name is Giovanni Clip, and tonight we're bringing you talent. Contestant number 1, let's bring Baby Car. Let's bring. He did it for you.
Cut. Oh, there is a leakage.
Where's the plumber? For quality and durability, insist on Syntex pipes.
If you want quality, this be where you belong.
Strong, tough, and reliable. Your perfect match to your trusted Syntex pipe. Syntex pipe, it dey carry water, no wahala. Syntex pipe, it dey make water dey flow. Syntex, and you're strong, and you're tough.
Oh, miss you guys.
For every sacrifice,
Hey, darling.
Close your eyes, baby.
every silent prayer,
Wow.
Thank you for being a wonderful moment.
Thank you.
I'm sure you love it.
she gave her all. Now it's your turn to give back something precious.
For everything you are and all things you do. Happy Mother's Day, love.
Oh, thank you.
This Mother's Day, celebrate her with something as precious as she is. Gold bought jewelry, pure, precious, proudly Guinean.
Turn your home and office design dreams into reality. Here at Lesh Fortune, interior design is our passion. Customized interior design solutions, top of the range products such as curtains and accessories, blinds and accessories, trendy for bespoke hotel, home and office furniture, top-notch space design services.
I'm the CEO of Builders Estates. When it comes to putting the final touch on all my building projects, I look no further than Lesh Fortune for all my interior decoration needs. They bring your ideas to life.
Turning your house into a home. It's more than just accessories. You need beauty and elegance, and the expertise is very important. That's why I choose Lesh Fortune Limited, because they have experience.
Yes, indeed. With our many years of experience, we would excite you. So make that call now. Call us on 0244-265588 or 0302-811163. Lesh Fortune Limited.
Lesh Fortune Limited, unleashing luxury with perfection, one space at a time.
Lesh Fortune Limited.
Oh, miss you guys.
For every sacrifice,
Hey, darling.
Close your eyes, baby.
every silent prayer,
Wow.
Thank you for being a wonderful moment.
Thank you.
I'm sure you love it.
she gave her all. Now it's your turn to give back something precious.
For everything you are and all things you do. Happy Mother's Day, love.
Oh, thank you.
This Mother's Day, celebrate her with something as precious as she is. Gold bought jewelry, pure, precious, proudly Guinean.
Another week is here on the greatest of all time show. My name is Giovanni Clark, and tonight we're bringing you talent. Contestant number 1, let's bring Baby Car. Let's bring. You did it for you.
Cut. Oh, there is a leakage.
Where's the plumber? For quality and durability, insist on Syntex pipes.
If you want quality, this be where you belong.
Strong, tough, and reliable. Your perfect match to your trusted Syntex pipe. Syntex pipe, it they carry water. No wahala. Syntex pipe, it they make water they flow. Syntex, and you're strong, and you're tough.
And thank you very much for staying with us here on PM Express. We are in the home of Tsatsu Tsikata, and yes, we are in a beautiful garden. And so if you see the flowers falling on our heads and you see it in the shot, you just have to make do with that because it's just beautiful here. And this is possibly one of his favorite places in the house because that's where you get closest to God, according to the sign I see there. So when you see that in a shot, don't worry, we are fine. It's so good television because we're in the garden. And then we're just enjoying a good conversation with Tsatsu Tsikata. He's told us a lot about what he endured behind bars. And I need to quote something he said last week when he delivered his lecture. Mr. Tsikata, you said, by God's grace, I have never harbored any grudges or felt bitterness against any of those who were involved in all that happened to me during the Akufo regime. How are you able to say that after what you just described to us?
That's the reality. That's my experience. The first day I was in that prison, the verse that was very clear on my mind was that don't worry about those who can harm you physically. You know, I mean, don't worry about that. So really, I didn't feel any hurt from that. As I said, I was puzzled. I was, I was not able to quite comprehend what was going on in that moment. But it didn't make me bitter towards the individuals. I mean, for instance, with the judge, frankly, I realized that she was not necessarily the orchestrator. But even with President Akufo, whom I knew was very much interested in having me in jail, I honestly couldn't have any bitterness or any grudge. And I've met him since, and we have exchanged pleasantries and so on. But again, I said by God's grace, yes, because that's what it is. I don't know how, but I don't feel any sort of.
Have you forgiven them?
And I have forgiven, and I don't even find anything worth talking about forgiveness. My wife and my mother are two of the most forgiving people that I've ever come across. Their generosity of spirit always amazes me. And I think I take something from them. So I really have forgiven. I don't harbor any strong emotions about what they did. Most important of all, as I wrote in my sort of reflection a year, a year after, I recognized that God meant it for good. God meant it for good. And there's so much of value that I realized from that experience. I mentioned a few instances of that. There's so much of value, especially, touching the lives of other people who have had some benefit from my being in prison at that time. So I feel grateful to God. I feel thankful that I could be a vessel for, some benefit to other people. I mean, there were many prisoners who came seeking legal guidance. On some occasion, I could help get them a lawyer. And in one case, as I mentioned in my remarks, I mean, this young man who, serious problem. One of the young lawyers visiting me, I agreed to help him. I got him to help. And the young man last December was in touch with me.
Oh, see.
He had come to Ghana, he was living abroad. He'd earned his doctorate degree. He'd come to Ghana. He was looking for the lawyer who had helped him, only to learn that the lawyer had passed. So he called, he left a message at my mother's house for me, and I called him. And he said, he had learned that, and that was actually the first time that I heard that younger lawyer friend of mine had passed. He was actually buried about 2 weeks ago. And that young man, after studying abroad, now he's, earned his doctorate degree. He is part of a high-powered advanced intelligence research project based at a university in Japan. And, that is a source of excitement for me and joy, and I mean, I'm grateful to God that I could be a part of that. There was somebody else, who I talked about. He, had an asthmatic attack. And one of the other prisoners came to tell me about it, needed medication. I gave away my medication, not knowing that by that evening, I would probably be needing it myself. But later on, he also gets out of prison. He's out of the country. And he's sending messages about his gratitude for the fact that my medication saved his life. And the colleague of his who had come to ask me for the medication, when he meets me 10 years later, when we go back for a medical mission in the prison, he's still there, sadly. But he tells me, after he recounts the story of this person who is now outside, he tells me by way of his own conclusion that, you had a chance to be taken out of the prison, but that gentleman would very likely not have been able to be, taken out of the prison. And so, you're giving your medication to him, even though you might have needed it. That helped save somebody's life. I mean, those are things that give me immense joy, and they give me the reflection that God meant it for good. There was a reason for my being there.
And talking about forgiveness, the two key individuals in this whole incident, you mentioned Kufuor already, and the Attorney General was none other than Akufo-Addo, who then later becomes...
Yeah, he started the process.
The process, yes.
And by the time it got to my imprisonment, it was Joe Garte who was Attorney General. But in fact, I think there were about 4 or 5 Attorney Generals
who started this.
That period.
I wonder if any of them, since this has happened, have reached out to you to at least Kufuor tried to make amends with the pardon. We don't know what happened there. You went to court to go and fight your case out and get the court to pronounce, because a pardon means you're guilty. And I remember you explaining your rationale for it. I remember listening to you, take the pardon. And he said you were going to fight it. But he at least tried to do that as president before he exited. What about the others? Have any of them tried to reach out?
No, and I don't really expect them to. Okay. There's no reason. They're living their lives as normal. And
have you encountered them since?
Perhaps they haven't reflected that whatever they did there was anything wrong with whatever they did. They haven't had that reflection. So I don't expect them to. I mean, of course, I've encountered, the former president
Akufo-Addo?
during, for instance, the 2013 election petition, when he was one of the petitioners and so on. Yes, I would see him in the court and so on. But there has never been a time of discussing or him reflecting on those experiences.
Another thing that you talked about last week that I want to reflect on is the judiciary. And you said in relation to this, but to make a bigger point, however, I do not wish such desecration of justice as I experienced on anyone. And you also actually talked about the Saul case, that again you bring in how justice is very important, the defense of people who can't defend themselves. I mean, what's your own philosophy about what the judiciary should be? And I think it was a Chief Justice who makes the point that for you, the law is not just this thing that you manipulate, for your own purposes to win a case or lose, but it's far more.
Absolutely.
Explain that.
I think that for us to have confidence as members of the public in the law and in the courts, the judges and so on, we need to feel that what they're doing is advancing a cause that benefits us all. The cause of justice, a cause that is for the society as a whole, maintaining order properly and so on. But where you sense that there is manipulation for a very limited and narrow political agenda, for instance, then it's troubling. It's really troubling. And that is why I gave some of those examples that I gave in the lecture. I mean, in the case of the Sal, the people in the Sal traditional areas, I mean, they, like any other citizen of Ghana, know that they're entitled to a vote. And when suddenly on the eve of an election, an announcement comes, you can't vote in the parliamentary election, you can vote in the presidential, but you can't vote. And it's never been explained. And so they were taken out of the election. Somebody was appointed, somebody was elected supposedly as a member of parliament for that constituency. They didn't have representation in the 8th parliament. I mean, we as Ghanaians, we should agonize over that situation, because it could happen to any other area. It could happen in Kumasi, it could happen in Accra, in whatever. Yeah. It could happen in Tamale. So the fact that those people for 4 years did not have representation in Parliament, that made Parliament incomplete as far as I'm concerned. And that's why I'm agitated by the fact that the process of getting justice for them, is unending. But I'm somebody who believes that however unending the process is, we must go through and fight for the rights to be done.
Part of the case is still before the courts. The Saul case, part of it is
it's still now on appeal.
On appeal.
Well, it was on appeal before the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal recently decided to state a case for the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court is now going to have to answer a number of questions that the Court of Appeal is putting before them before we know the outcome of that case. And so we go on. But, I gave the other example of Honorable Jachi Kweson's case, which, saw us, there was an injunction against him. He wasn't able to sit in Parliament around the time when the e-levy and so on, were being, those issues were being debated. And again, it was clear that because of the numbers in Parliament, the hung Parliament, he needed to be put out of, Parliament. And so an injunction is granted. Meanwhile, the same Supreme Court had told us in the Sal and other cases that you only take out a member of Parliament through an election petition. An election petition is the only procedure where you can challenge the election of a member of parliament. But in his case, even though they'd gone to the High Court, they got a decision, it was on appeal, and they tried to get an order, of the Court of Appeal to stop him from going on as a member of parliament. They didn't succeed. Then they start a new proceeding in the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, which had told us in the Sal case that you can't originate such a matter here or in any other court for that matter, not even in any other process, not by a human rights petition. That Supreme Court hears the matter, grants an interim injunction, and then later actually determines that he was not properly elected, he was not qualified, and therefore his election was invalid. It's very hard to, the inconsistency is glaring. And so that is what makes people begin to have questions. Is this a quest for justice? Is this really the judiciary administering the law according to their oath of office? And again, I'm sure you may recall in the 2021 election petition and so on, in some of my final submissions, I was referring to the judges to their oath of office and the fact that, they should determine these matters in accordance with their oath of office. Here was a situation again in that 2021 election petition where the Constitution makes somebody responsible as the returning officer for the presidential election. To this day, we don't have a definitive accounting for that election. And, there were different ways that we sought to have that person testify. There was something interesting that a lot of people may not have paid attention to. Apart from our submissions that the chairperson of the Electoral Commission had, deposed to an affidavit, had done a witness statement indicating that she would testify on behalf of the commission. When all that did not succeed, we then said, the petitioners, we would subpoena her as a witness. In other words, we were now going to call her as a witness because, again, she's an individual. She can be subpoenaed by order of the court, and she's not necessarily the Electoral Commission as a whole. But we said we want to subpoena her, and even that was not allowed. It was a big risk we were taking because when you subpoena a witness, the testimony of that witness is going to be used against you. So she could have actually come to testify, and we would have had no control really over what she would have said. But we were determined to take that risk because we wanted her to have to give an account. Whatever the account she would give, we wanted it to be heard by the people of Ghana.
What's your reflection on the judiciary right now? Has it reformed substantially now?
I think we're going to have a whole program on the judiciary, not as a
and what would it take?
Question.
What would it take for it to meet the high aspirations you have for it?
Yeah, I think what I can say very briefly is that I think some of the worst excesses of, the judiciary clearly being manipulated, some of those worst excesses are behind us, fortunately. And I think that, again, one only has to appeal to the conscience of the judges. Because, these are people who, like you and I, they have consciences. They also have had a legal education, and they understand what the law requires and so on. So it is not as if they are unable to, reflect on what they're doing. So I'm ever optimistic about judges being able to rise to the occasion. Look, in the end, a court of appeal unanimously acquitted and discharged me on all the counts. It took 8 years after the initial decision. But it still gave me the assurance that justice, there was a verse that my sister sent to me. She lives in Kumasi, and I think a friend of hers had given her that verse, which she sent to me. Is from, I think, Psalm 94, verse 15. Justice will once again be found in the courts, and all righteous people will support it. That is also something that kept me going. And so in a lot of my advocacy and my passion about the cases that I'm handling and the right things being done, I have an inbuilt conviction that the law and justice can be found in the courts. And one of my clients recently has been asking me persistently, when he was going through experiences of, the court processes being seemingly manipulated, he was asking, do you still have confidence in the courts? And I would say to him, yes, I don't have an alternative anyway, but I do. And I promise you, you will see why in the end. Let us just keep going, put on the record what our conviction is about the right thing to be done, and in the end, God willing.
And there's something back to the Saul thing very briefly. You said, I dare say they are owed reparation. You meant that literally? Literally,
yes. Because, they are part of this country. If they had a representative in Parliament, that representative would have had access to the common fund and so on, which they could have used for projects in that area. During those 4 years, they had no representation. And so in my mind, whatever the state can do to ensure that what they were not able to access in that period should be accorded to them. I think that's fair, don't you think so? I really believe that what happened in respect of Saul is not only unprecedented, but it is a danger to the Republic. Because if you can have these situations where pockets of the country find that they are somehow just excluded, you can imagine how the build-up of that sort of experience, if it's more than a few places. And that's why I also use the analogy of my law professor, Professor Hart, that you want to distinguish a legal system from a gang of robbers.
Okay.
Because a legal system is a system which is understood by the whole society as, working for the benefit of the society as a whole. And that's why we talk about the rule of law, equality before the law. But these shouldn't just be pronouncements, because if they are just pronouncements, then you can also have a gang of robbers which constitutes itself into seemingly an order, and they try to instruct people what to do and so on. But there is a difference. And we lawyers and those in the judiciary must eagerly ensure that that differentiation is clear on the minds of the population, that we are there to administer justice. That must be the clear testimony on the part of judges. We're there, and what we're doing is in the interest of justice. Some of the experiences that I've recounted do not suggest that, but I think, we can encourage more and more of that commitment to justice, that commitment to the rule of law and so on. These are not just phrases that we should be mouthing.
And I've always been curious to ask, have you ever thought of joining the bench?
Well, I said in my lecture that in that December 1959, December UAC interview, I boldly said I'm going to be a lawyer and subsequently a judge. But the judge part, frankly, I never had much of an interest in that.
Why,
when I became an adult. I think because I moved into a different dimension of the application of law, for instance, in relation to natural resources, what I did in GMPC. And so on. So I began to see that itself as a kind of a mission, you know, because you're in a country blessed with natural resources and yet not always having the capabilities, technological, financial, and so on, to get those natural resources out of the ground for the benefit of the people. So once I started getting more involved in that area, you know, oil and gas, natural resource extraction and so on, it really became my passion also. And so I saw my use of the law not as, you know, just administering justice in individual cases, but more or less enabling the country as a whole to benefit from our God-given resources. And so, frankly, I lost that track a long time ago.
Because each time I've seen you before the courts, some of the judges at the Supreme Court acknowledge your influence on their lives because you lectured a lot of them, you taught them.
Yes.
I've always wondered what sort of, how did you feel each time you came before them and you saw all your students that you graded, you helped, you taught?
Well, let me tell you, when I've appeared before the Supreme Court, even if all of them are my students, I have recognized the importance of not always reminding them that they were my students. Because in fact, some of them don't want to be reminded that they were my students. But really, on a more serious note, I recognize in the moment that I'm before them that they have their responsibility as judges. I have my responsibility as an advocate before them. And I must show the respect for their position, regardless of what they were in the past. So frankly, I don't dwell on the past. Sometimes they themselves sort of like to acknowledge that, yes, you know, Mr. Tsikata, you taught us and so on. But I really don't like to play that tune too loudly when I'm before them.
Have you ever been before a judge you thought and probably delivered a judgment or a ruling and you felt, I taught you well? I mean, and you knew this one, that judge got you. You know, somebody you thought, like you felt proud.
Oh,
although you were on the other side, you were on the wrong side of that ruling of judgment.
Absolutely,
and I felt proud.
I have felt very proud. There have also been instances where I didn't
I can imagine. I can imagine.
And no, definitely, I've had occasions when, I mean, even during the election petition, you know, there were several matters on which they gave rulings and so on, and that is 2013. And some of the rulings didn't go in our favor, but there were occasions when, as you listened to the ruling, even though it didn't go in your favor, you respected the way, the reasoning that had gone into it, and even the conclusions that had been reached. And so yes, I felt very proud.
Fascinating.
Of many of my students. And again, I mean, I must confess, you know, when I'm in court these days, sometimes I listen to a ruling and I'm really quite excited. I mean, recently I was in a court, I won't mention which one, but I was in a court outside Accra, and I heard a judge, I didn't know who she was, but I heard a judge read a ruling. I had nothing to do with that case, but I just heard her read a ruling. And the meticulous way in which she proceeded, she wasn't a former student of mine, I didn't know her at all, but it made me good. It made me feel good about being in that court at that moment, because it also gave me the confidence that I was expressing in the judiciary, that you can have judges who will pay attention to the law, they will go through their judgment in a meticulous way and reach a conclusion. I'm sure that whoever she decided against in that case probably didn't feel that she had decided rightly. But for me, not knowing, it wasn't a question of whether she done the right thing or the wrong thing, but just the way that she articulated her reasons and came to a conclusion was just amazing.
I mean, as we end, I've always wanted to pick your thoughts on this. We currently have the Ghana we currently live in, but we always aspire for a Ghana that we believe would meet our aspirations. I wonder, what's the Tsatsu's dream of the Ghana that you really want to see, not for yourself, but for your children, your grandchildren? I've seen that your grandchildren are still with you. When you look at them, what is the Ghana that you wish for them? That you fought for, obviously, I mean, over the years, for decades. What's that Ghana you wish for them?
You know, it's a very deep question that you've asked. I mean, the Ghana that I've always wished for is a Ghana, one, in which there is a respect for each other, regardless of political party affiliation or whatever. But there is a respect for each other as Ghanaians. And there is a sense of common destiny, a common destiny in which, I mean, we are all fighting for that destiny. And that destiny in my imagination is a destiny of prosperity, in the sense of, the country taking a hold of our God-given endowments, including the human endowments. We have human resources to an incredible extent. Ghana has been, for centuries, known for, education, high sort of intellectual caliber, the Willem Amus and so on, who became great professors in German universities, in past century. So I see a country with rich human and natural resources. And I just wish that those resources can be harnessed as part of that common destiny that we fight for. And that we don't get distracted. I mean, obviously, there will be differences where individuals with different, orientations and aspirations, but I really wish for my grandchildren the actual experience of that destiny of a prosperous and peaceful and harmonious coexistence, which I see occasional glimpses of from time to time. There have been periods in this country where you felt that, there was a common striving in some of the 80s and 90s, where even in difficult economic circumstances, you had a sense of, people, students, would give up, their university education, go out and carry cocoa, and enable us to earn some foreign exchange and enable the work of the farmer to become, value for the country and so on. So there have been glimpses of those possibilities. And I think Ghana, should find ways of really advancing beyond those glimpses into a kind of total experience of that kind of, harmonious and joyful coexistence that sometimes we seem to, it eludes us. It eludes us. Sometimes when you hear the passions of partisanship and, and sometimes that partisanship can blind people even to simple truth. Sometimes, for instance, when people, hear some of my experiences, just for partisan reasons, they don't want to know. It didn't happen, But we've got to come to a place where, the truth doesn't change because you belong to this party or that party. Justice has to be administered whether you belong here or you belong there. And, well-being is vital for all of us, whether we belong to this or we belong to that. And I think that realization needs to dawn on us more. And I believe that is, part of the future path that we should look forward to as a country.
It's been fascinating talking to you, Mr. Tsikata, and helping me relive my years covering the trial that eventually led to your incarceration. But of course, it ended with a victory for you, which is, I guess, what you were making, the point you're making biblically. It was all meant for good. And that is Tsatsu Tsikata, a man who fascinating insights into legal, but he shared his thoughts about this country. And I bet you've learned a few things about a life that he's lived, well lived obviously, and that's why he was given that award last week. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Can he tee up someone in red? And it goes to one!
That's who goal is for. I got 5 champions league. You want to know? I be the real goat.
Who is the goat? Ghana Jollof or Nigeria Jollof?
Ghana Jollof has no co-equal. The smell alone. Oh my God.
Brother Shift, you two they lie, eh? Now the same stew when they use cook the rice and then they go put them for top.
Hey! You are lying. Ghana Jollof.
Are you busy? Forget everybody. Yeah. My guy. What you papa Nija? Put some respect on the goat. On the goat. The only goat I know lives in Tama. Every year we dey give to you back. We are talking about BET. I want some Agyeman-Rawlings face. Except be the goat, huh? My guy, him be the goat.
Though our choice of goats may differ in football, music, and jollof, Alomobitis always brings us together. Alomo, experience greatness in every moment.
Drink responsibly. Not for sale to persons under 18 and recommended to pregnant women. This advert is FDA approved.
You guys are ready for what's about to happen? Only on Joy Prime Television.
All right.
Listen.
Okay.
Yeah. Hey, my name is MC Kofi Darlington. Out here, my sister, the guy is quick. Giving the rappers the platform to show their flow. They go blow. Beats and bars to the hardest thing. You get back, split up, the baddest thing. This be the mic, make me see the fire. No darling, cause we know the tire.
Stage that's it. Mike and I are ready. What's a rapper? So now you will rap. Beats and bars. You get bars, challenge.
Yo.
This is not just